Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Let's Have Words. I am your host, LARA Samuels. We are coming to you live every other Thursday from WWHR Internet Media Studios here in the beautiful state of New Hampshire. We do the show live, and then we do a rebroadcast, and then we do it live, and then we do a rebroadcast. Okay, so whether or not this is live depends on which week you are watching us, and what is this show about? I know that you're wondering, so I want to let you know that this show is about just having discussions, having in-depth and honest and civil discussions about the state of our planet. So generally speaking, we focus on three very broad topics. The first topic, and one that is very dear to my heart, is the biodiversity crisis. The fact that we are losing nature at a very rapid pace. And the second major broad topic is climate change, which it is the position of the show that climate change is caused by the burning of fossil fuels and that we need to transition into a green energy future. And then the third really broad topic is pollution. Pollution being, pollution from plastics, pollution from pesticides, pollution. Carbon dioxide is of course, pollution, and any other types of chemical pollution that we are presently very, very content with sort of dumping a lot of poisons into our environment and toxins. And so that is also an issue. So those three things, those biodiversity loss, I like to say the nature crisis, because it's shorter and fits better on a hat. The nature crisis, climate change, and pollution are three intersecting but separate issues in the sense that they have different causes, but they have some things in common. They certainly do overlap. And the idea is that we address those three big, broad topics together. And so we need it is the position of the show that we, being humans, so we're talking at the state level, we're talking at the country level, globally, we need a comprehensive plan to restore nature, to address the climate crisis. The only way we're going to do this is if we do this cooperatively and collaboratively. This is a global issue. It's local and it's global. So it's something that we can all participate in. It's not partisan in any way. It's really not political. I think some of the, recent developments in our politics have made it political for some reason. But of course, I'm sure you've heard the phrase that the earth is what we have in common. And that is really true. We're all living here, and destroying the life support system on which we all depend is frankly stupid. So we like to point that out as often as we can. Okay, so that's what we like to talk about in this show. It is a call-in show. So the idea of it is that we have conversations. These would be rational conversations. These would be, substantial conversations, civil, looking for common ground here, looking to, explore solutions together. I welcome skepticism. I welcome a little healthy debate. I welcome passion, but what I don't welcome is incivility. When we have discussions on the show, it is a requirement that those discussions remain civil. So there's a fine line between passion and incivility. So I don't mind passionate discussion. But once it crosses that line, that is when I really think that it is counterproductive, and that I would rather not engage in those conversations, waste my energy and time. So, but I do welcome debate and discussion and discourse. I mean, that's kind of what the show is about. We have to have these conversations, and we have to take it serious. One reason why I'm doing this show now, first of all, personally, I've always been an environmentalist all of my life. I was a born environmentalist. I think I was born worrying about nature and wanting to protect it and care for it. Something you really can't explain to people that don't have that instinct, but it's very powerful. But it wasn't really until several years ago that I really woke up to the urgency of the situation. And because I guess I always thought that I knew that we were wrecking the environment, we being humans. I knew we were wrecking the environment. But for some reason, I had a lot of faith in humanity, I guess, and I always thought that we would turn it around at some point, and that the whole idea of nature disappearing was such a ridiculous idea. I mean, it would have never occurred to me even 5 years ago that was the case. But, I started to wake up. I started to read some things. I started to really become aware of the urgency of the situation and how ecosystems can collapse, and how we really, even though we do invest a lot in conservation, we spend a lot more money. I actually have this as one to talk about later, but we spend a lot more money on destroying nature, on nature destroying practices. So it really is not enough what we do. It's not keeping up with the level of destruction. And the reason we're destroying nature and the reason we're destroying our planet and polluting our planet and making our planet so that it's going to be uninhabitable in places, which is going to create a lot of conflict and resource scarcity. The reason that's happening is because of our lifestyles. We are very anti-nature. When I say we, I mean Western culture. I'm from the United States. I can really only speak for my country. In the United States, we are nature hating. Our entire culture is anti-nature. And so to turn things around, to restore nature, we really have to change how we think, how we behave, what we value, what we put first. Do we put wealth, individual wealth, people's wealth first, or do we put human health and the environment first? And I think you have to start with the notion that, human health and the environment are at the center of our commerce, at the center of our society, and you move from there. And once again, I'm not against, people making a living. That's not, and I'm not even anti-capitalist. I am for things that work. I am for moving forward with, making as many people as possible meeting their basic needs. I care about all animals, including humans, meeting everybody's basic needs without wrecking nature. I mean, this is a problem we can solve. We do, and we have the solutions. So this show is also very positive. We like to be positive. We do talk about the urgency, though. I think that sometimes people get, trying to draw attention to the depth of the problem with doom and gloom. I am not doom and gloom. I believe I still have that, even though I told you about 5 years ago, I really woke up to the fact that we weren't turning things around. I still hang on to that belief that humans are, we have the ability to solve problems. We have the ability to collaborate and to cooperate and to work together to solve problems. And I really believe, even after all that's been going on here in my country, I still believe that can happen. But I do think people have to become aware of how serious the problem is. So that's what we try to do in the show. We try to raise awareness, and we try to offer hope and vision and solutions. And that is what we need. We also need a little bit of hope here. I mean, I think that a lot of people are demoralized and they're feeling, very helpless. And I think we need to come up with a good vision of the future, a pathway forward that is not, just chaos and misery and conflict and competition and, a few people, dominating that own all the resources and have all the power and all the wealth, and the rest of us scramble, and where nature is completely marginalized. I don't think that's a world I want to live in. I don't think that's a world you want to live in. And I think that's really where we're headed unless we take action. So, all right. So the show is a call-in show. So you can call in anytime. I will want to talk to you. I do have a couple rules about calling in. I mentioned, of course, keep it civil, but also, have a point, right? We don't want to just be scattered and have, try to be, addressing every single thing. You need to have a real point that we can really dive into and really explore, right? So I think that's really important too, to remember if you call in, to have something to talk about, something relevant. There are plenty of topics we could talk about that I'm not going there on this show, right? We once again, what are we focused on? Climate change, biodiversity loss, or the nature crisis, I like to call it, and pollution. Anything in there's a whole zillions of things we can discuss under those canopies. But of course, there's a lot of other topics that we don't want to get off on. Okay. So that's where we're focused on the show. So the show is split into 3 parts. So we have the first part coming up here in a minute. And that's called Let's Do the Numbers. And on Let's Do the Numbers, I just kind of pick some numbers. Like, I read a lot of stuff. I'm always interested in this topic, and I'm always trying to find out more. So, I read a lot of things, and whenever I find like a statistic or something, because I love numbers, right? So anytime I find a statistic or something like that, I'll write it down and we'll explore it. And it also opens up, the statistics sort of open up, a place to converse. Okay. And then the second part is what's on Lara's mind. And that's kind of just when I sort of, freewheelingly sort of talk about what I've been thinking about lately, which is often very hard to do because this topic is on my mind all the time. And so it's kind of hard to narrow it down, but I try to do that. And then the last topic, if we get to it, the last segment, I should say, is peruse the news. And we look at some news stories. I try to have a mix of good and bad, although I'm looking over the ones I have for this week, and I won't see very many positive things, but whatever I find, that's why I write it down, and we can talk about it. That opens up some more areas for discussion, right? So that's kind of the thing. We do have a format, but we're free flowing, we're spontaneous, we're open to discussion, and that's what it's all about. So feel free to call in. So let's start it off with Let's Do the Numbers. I have several numbers for you this week that we can discuss. And the first one is the number 17. And that 17 is, this is a percent, 17% of land and 8% of ocean. So that's our other number there, is currently protected. So these are protected areas on the globe. This is globally 17% of land and 8% of ocean. I don't know. What do you guys think about? I think that sounds pretty pathetic. I think we need to protect more. Actually, some of the goals, the global goals, of some of these conferences and stuff are, to get to 30%. I don't know if that's 30% of land and 30% of ocean, or if that's 30% overall. I believe it's 30% of land and 30% of ocean, but I could be wrong. Anyway, well, I would say more. I go with one of my favorite books, which is Half Earth, where the scientist E.O. Wilson discusses the concept of leaving half of the earth for nature. So I would go be more ambitious than that. You always have to ask for more than you want, right? Isn't that the rule? If you ask for 30, you're going to get 15. So we got to ask for 50 so we can get 30. Isn't that how that works? I think so. Speaking of conservation, conservation is an important part of reaching our goal. Our goal here, it's the position of the show that we should be working hard to become nature positive. That is, to increase the amount of nature on the planet. It's currently in decline, and we need to halt that, reverse that, and increase it. So we embrace the philosophy of the Nature Positive Initiative, which is a global initiative which with the goal of achieving 2020 levels of nature by 2030. So getting back to where we were in 2020 by 2030. So halting and reversing the decline, and then to be nature positive by 2050. So we actually want to increase the amount of nature, or higher than the levels that we saw in 2020. That's a big, ambitious goal. And of course, it requires, there's a lot of things that, a lot of questions, like how do you measure biodiversity and what, it seems like a colossal, impossible task, but, you got smart people are working on this stuff. And, we have a lot of technology now, and that can help us with that sort of thing, with data collection and monitoring and all of that. So I mean, it's definitely possible, and it's definitely going to require a change, though, in how we live and how we think and all of that. So conservation is good. We have to aim for more conservation, but in addition to conservation, we want to focus on integration. Integration means having nature exist in the places we live and work. So we build for nature, we farm for nature. Every single sector, every single sector of society, and every individual needs to think about how they can become nature positive. And that's how we get there. That's how we arrive at those goals. So this is a big thing, right? This is a big movement, and we've got to make it happen, right? We got to make it happen. I am going to remain hopeful that we can do that, right? I like to say I'm a hopeful pessimist. So the hope keeps you motivated. The pessimism keeps it real. Okay. All right. So that's our first number. And then here we have another number here, 65. Okay. So apparently, there's all these efforts to do carbon capture, to get the carbon out of our, atmosphere and capture it, because we're releasing carbon dioxide. We are releasing carbon dioxide into the environment, and that is warming the planet. Okay. This is non-negotiable. Now I'll listen to people's, stories. I think I've heard most of them. I think I've heard most of the climate denier stories and excuses and all. And it's not like I'm opposed to listening to them some more. But carbon dioxide is what's driving the climate crisis, and that comes from burning fossil fuels, for sure. There's no doubt. Something like 99% of people who study this stuff agree that is the case. So they don't have a motive. I mean, show me their motive other than telling the truth. So I believe the scientists. I believe that that's what's happening. It actually makes sense. We're taking carbon that's under the ground, and we're bringing it up, and we're burning it. And, I don't know about you, but I learned about the carbon cycle when I was in like elementary school, right? What happens to carbon, right? And we're adding more carbon to the environment. We're just putting more in the pool, right? So naturally that's going to have consequences. So there's an effort to get the carbon out of the atmosphere. I am going to address the number here, but I do want to say that look around at the plants. I mean, I had a friend of mine point this out to me, that the plants are much bigger than they used to be. They're loving the carbon dioxide. Not a good thing, by the way. Necessarily, maybe good for the plants. I think we're entering the age of plants, actually. I think animals are in decline and plants are going to be taking over. They're enjoying the carbon very much because they can grow bigger, etc. But the animals that feed on the plants, these are not nutrient dense plants. They're the herbivores, the little insects and things that feed the caterpillars and they're expending a lot of energy eating, but they're not getting the nutrients from that. So that is not necessarily a good thing if we're thinking about the balance of nature, right? So I think you just have to look at the plants, and that's proof enough for me that we're dumping carbon into the atmosphere. And where else would it be coming from other than out of our power plants and out of our tailpipes, etc. Right? So so they do carbon capture, of course, to try and get the carbon out of the atmosphere. Why would these fossil fuel companies are investing in that? Why would they be investing in it if it wasn't real, if it wasn't actually happening? You have to ask yourself that question. Okay, so 65, that's our number. Renewables. A renewable takes out more carbon than carbon capture, than the equivalent, I guess, I don't know, the equivalent amount of renewable energy takes out 65 times, or avoids polluting at a level that's 65 times what our carbon capture, our current carbon capture technologies can do. Of course, the best carbon capture technology of all, forests, nature-based solutions. Forests sequester carbon. Of course, when they are burning, they release it all. So that's a bummer, because we're increasing our forest fires, as you know, because of climate change, not because of all the extra fuel on the forest floor. Although, that is true, that wood burns, and the more you have of it lying around, the more fuel there is. But forest fires like that don't happen without the climate conditions that we're seeing. I should save a show for that. I should write that down, because I want to do a whole show on that. I don't want to talk about that today. I'm going to write it down. Forest fire show. We'll talk about that. I think that's a good topic for next week, maybe, or 2 weeks from now, every other week. Okay. The war against nature. $2.6 trillion in public subsidies for nature-destroying industries like fossil fuels, industrialized agriculture, mining, construction, forestry, and 4.9 trillion yearly spent on private nature-destroying practices. Adding up, 4.9 plus 2.6 is $7.5 trillion spent yearly on nature-destroying practices, and that is an underestimate. At the same time, about 200 billion on conservation and restoration. So let's think about that, imbalance there, right? I mean, it doesn't matter if 200 billion sounds like a lot of money until you find out that at the same time, there's $7.5 trillion being spent to destroy nature. Who's going to win? What do you think is going to happen? We are destroying our planet. We're wrecking our planet. It's the way we live. We don't have to live this way. We can live differently. We can figure out how to live differently so that we're not destroying the planet. Speaking of that, the top 10, here's my last number, the top 10% of income levels. So the richest people in the world, the top 10%, they're the ones, rich people, how dare you? Top 10%, they're the ones that are responsible for most of the biodiversity loss. So that's good news and bad news in my mind. If it's really just a concentrated group of people that are really driving this, then I think it's easier to change. If it's a smaller group that's really the major culprits here, then it's going to be easier and faster to change. Think about it. If you just had one person you had to persuade to change, that's a lot easier than persuading the entire planet, right? So if we can just persuade the top 10% of people to change their ways, then perhaps we can make a difference. Can we do that? I don't know. I think that our society rewards greed, selfishness, cronyism, I think there's a lot of people. I don't want to say everybody, right? Never want to say everybody, but there's a lot of people who are very wealthy who are hanging on to their wealth just because they like the wealth, they like the power, and they don't really have any incentive to change how they're doing stuff, because it's just pure greed. It's just pure greed. So, can we convince those people to change how they're doing things? I don't know. We need to. That's all I'm going to say. All right. So let's do the numbers for this week. Next, by the way, this is a call-in show. You can call in anytime you want. We can have civil discourse. We can talk about anything related to the nature crisis, climate crisis, pollution, whatever's on your mind. Why don't you share it? So next segment is What's on Lara's Mind.
What's on Lara's mind tonight? What's on Lara's mind?
All right. I read this wonderful quote, and I want to share it with you. The old world, leave it up to me not to write down the whole thing. I think it's when the old world is dying and a new one is struggling to emerge. In that moment, monsters are born. So that was referring to the rise of fascism in the late 1930s, 1940s. And what I like about this quote is that believe it or not, there's some hope in that quote, because it's saying that a new world is struggling to emerge. And that world that's struggling to emerge right now, I think, is a beautiful world. I think the world that's struggling to emerge is a more equitable world, a world where we respect the planet that we live on, a world where we respect one another, where we exercise compassion, where we put nature and human health at the center of society instead of greed, instead of wealth. I think that's the new world that's struggling to emerge. I see signs of it everywhere. And I think the old world is, this whole idea that we can just keep abusing. Of course, everybody's going to interpret this quote the way they want to, but this is how I see it. The old world is that we can keep on abusing our planet and keep on living the way we live in this abundance, and consumer driven society, that we can just keep doing this forever. And I think that's ridiculous. The old world is dying. It has to die. It absolutely has to die. And a new one is struggling to emerge. So that's a beautiful idea, that we have this new world that's struggling to emerge. And that's when the worst time is. That's when monsters are born, right? So the monsters that we're seeing right now, I'm not going to mention any names, the monsters that we're seeing right now are emerging from that clash. And there's no telling how long it will last, but I think we are in a period of great change and great upheaval. And that's exciting, scary. It's all of those things. But I think the whole reason for it is that a new world is struggling to emerge. And that's where the hope is. That's where the hope is in that quote. That's why I love it. All right. I just wanted to tell you, so I wanted to read you that quote. That's all. And I wanted to tell you that I went to a rally in Concord, New Hampshire this weekend. And last weekend, whatever. And Ro Khanna was speaking. And Ro Khanna might run for president someday. I don't know. I think he's thinking about it. So he was speaking. He gave a speech. And like most Democrats, whether they're traditional Democrats or establishment Democrats or even the progressives like Roe. I think he sort of sees himself that way. It doesn't matter either way. Most of the time, even Bernie Sanders, you listen to Bernie, most of the time, the climate, the environment, the biodiversity crisis, pollution, the fact that we're wrecking our life support system, for some reason, does not seem to be top of the agenda. In fact, it's not even mentioned. We talk about building houses for people and healthcare and all these things that are important. But if we just carry on with business as usual, even if we're providing homes for people and, even if we're providing healthcare for people, we're facing a period of conflict, resource scarcity, nature destruction. We don't clean up the pollution that we're putting into the environment. We're facing the prospect of more illness, more disease. Yeah, sure. I make sure everybody has healthcare, but why is everybody sick? Maybe we need to address that problem, right? So not top of the agenda of the environment for Roe in his speech. It was a 15-minute speech, but I've heard him talk other places, and I've heard other Democrats, progressive and establishment Democrats. It's not like I'm listening to people all the time. So, I'm just saying from my point of view, what I hear is an utter. It's almost like there's a blackout on talking about the environment. Like they think the environment's not going to sell to the average voter, and so they leave it off the agenda. I don't think that's true. I think you just have to discuss it in the right way. I think that most people connect with nature. I think most people care, don't want to destroy the planet. I think most people can see the effects of climate change, the heat, the wildfires, the flooding. I really just think it's a matter of messaging and how you talk about things. And I don't hear any of these people talking about anything. Anyway, so very brave of me. I've got to say, I was very proud of myself. I ran right up to Ro Khanna after he got off the stage. I mean, this is completely unlike me, right? I mean, I would never have done anything like this in my life. But I just was so angry that he hadn't mentioned the environment. And not just him. I don't want to single him out because it's everybody. So I ran up. I got right in his face. I just walked up to him, stuck my hand out. He shook my hand. And I said, why did you not mention the environment? And I always mention biodiversity loss along with climate change. So I said, climate change, biodiversity loss. Why did you not mention these things in your speech? And he said, well, I only had 15 minutes. And I said something along the lines of, well, this is the biggest issue of our time, right? Why would you leave it out of your speech, And then I said, well, how about this? I said, how about when you talk about all this building we're going to be doing, that you add the word sustainable. Can you say that? Can you add that word to your speech? Sustainable building? And he said, yes, I will. I said, I put my thumb up like that, and I walked away. And that was the extent of our conversation. It was like less than a minute. And we'll see. I don't know. I felt really, really good, that I was brave enough to do that. And you never know, you're planting seeds, right? You're planting seeds all over the place. All right, I want to make sure we have a little bit of time for Peruse the News. So I just wanted to tell that story. That's all I wanted to do this week. All right, Peruse the News. Let's go.
Peruse the news, peruse the news. It's time to 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 peruse the news.
All right. So first of all, I want to say this is a call-in show. You can call in anytime. We can talk about whatever you want, as long as it's related to the nature crisis, climate change, pollution. We can talk about it on the show. That's it. That's the topic. We're topical here. Okay. We're not going to get off topic. So we went through some numbers. We talked about how 17% of the land and 8% of the oceans are protected. We need to get those numbers up. We talked about how much destruction there is every year compared to how much money we invest in conservation and restoration, and how that is not a sustainable situation. There's a lot more money. I think it's 30 to 1. I have to do the math, but I think it's 30 to $1. $30 for for $30 spent on destroying nature for every $1 spent on conserving or restoring. So that is not a good situation. But we also discovered this week that I discovered, maybe you discovered this a long time ago, top 10% of, wealth, the people that are enjoying the most wealth on the planet, the top 10%, they're really the ones that are driving a lot of the destruction of the planet. So that's good news and bad news, we mentioned, because it's good news in the sense that when you have a smaller group that is responsible, then perhaps you have an opportunity to change things much faster. The larger the number of people involved, the harder it is to change. And then we talked a little bit about how I told us a little story about how I tried to plant a seed in Rokana's mind, and let's see if it sprouts anything. I don't know. All right. And here's another quote I forgot to mention. Well, it's not really a quote, but I like this idea. The time of doing something good for nature to appease our own conscience is gone. Okay. So that's how we've been approaching. I really think that's important. I can't believe I skipped that. I really think that's important. Let's read it again. At the time of doing something good for nature and to appease our own conscience is gone. In other words, this is how we have been approaching nature destruction. We've been approaching it like we have to do good things for nature because we feel guilty or we feel bad. That's over. It's time for active, right? Not just conservation, because conservation is kind of passive. Conservation implies that you're protecting something from a force, right? You're conserving it, right? But we want to do something active. We want to restore, right? We want to become nature positive. We want to reclaim. We want to, that is what active. This is how we want to be. I really feel like people who care about nature, I think they need to get out of that loop of, we need to conserve, and enter into a much more active stance on this issue. I think that is a problem of attitude, and a problem of culture, and a problem of inertia, and a problem of just mindset, right? That needs to change. Wake up. Time to restore, right? The time of doing something good for nature to appease our own conscience is gone. No more thinking that way. We have to think actively, right? Restore. Okay. Peruse the news. So that had nothing to do with the news, but peruse news. By the way, this is a call-in show. I'd love for you to call in anytime. We can have a discussion. In the meantime, I'll just read a few things. Let's see. I got about 5 minutes. Read a few things that I read about this week. And as I'm looking here, I'm not seeing anything very positive, but that's okay. As I mentioned, I do like to stay hopeful. There are ways forward. We do have the technology. We do have the ability to do this. It's a matter of will. There are so many exciting technologies. It's so hopeful, like in the green energy world. We've talked about these things before, in using nature as a solution, right? That there's a lot of positive out there. So it just so happens that this week, the headlines that I captured were not that positive. Let's see, from The Guardian, the UK has no future if it fails to act on ecosystem collapse. Increase in food shortages, increase in prices, increase in political destabilization, an increase in warfare, an increase in migration, climate refugees. I'm sure you've heard that term. It's already happening. People are moving from places where it's becoming less habitable to places where it's more habitable. And that is a recipe for disaster. When you have too many people fighting over too few resources, that's when you have conflict, right? And if we want a secure, safe future, we need to take action on ecosystem collapse. Now, when I look at that, though, I'm thinking, okay, well, that's bad. Ecosystem collapse, food shortages, these are terrible things. But the point is that this was a statement here, raising awareness. This was from, I don't know who said this. The UK has no future. Oh, I guess that was the headline. That was the headline. Okay, so they're having these discussions, right? So people in the UK, at least, are having these discussions, serious discussions, and they're connecting ecosystem collapse to, security, which is good because that's a practical thing that people can, they're more likely to act when they feel like there's some practical application. I don't need a practical application. I love nature. I think nature has a right to be here. I don't need any practical reason. I don't think nature exists for us. I don't think that that it's not nature's job to help us to live. That's, we're all interconnected, by the way. Even right now, I'm acting like we're separate from nature. We're part of nature, but nature doesn't exist for us. That's how we treat it. Even in the statements we're making now, when we're addressing the biodiversity crisis, it's as though we're saying, well, look at all these things that nature does for us, right? And if we don't restore it, we're going to end up with resource scarcity and high prices and political destabilization and all this horrible stuff and war. But nature has a right to be here. I mean, the rest of nature, we're part of nature. The rest of nature has a right to be here. We need to share the planet. It's that simple. It's a social justice issue. And also, it's just a matter of beauty. Do you really want to live on a planet where there's no, pelicans and, cardinals and frogs and turtles and beautiful butterflies and dragonflies and ground beetles and, worms and centipedes and all these wonderful, incredible, diverse creatures that we share the planet with? I like them. I want to be on a planet with them. And that is it. That is all of the reason I need. Out of the same article, every critical here's some really bad news, doom and gloom right here. Every critical ecosystem across our planet is on a pathway to irreversible collapse. Every critical ecosystem across our planet is on a pathway to irreversible collapse. That was Chris, because I have terrible handwriting. I think it's Hunchcliffe or Heathcliff or, oh gosh, I don't know. I apologize. Anyway, he's an MP, member of Parliament, Labor, from the Labor Party, said that. Well, is that a call to action? I think so. It's a call to action. You know what's a call to action? Last week in New Hampshire, the only reason why it wasn't like obscenely hot one day was because, well, not just one day, for a few days, was because of the wildfires smoke that was in the air. Is that not a call to, I think that's a call to action. I don't know. Global boom. Here's one more, and then we're gonna close it out here. Global boom in livestock. Oh my gosh, this depressed me so much because I didn't know it was this bad. Ready? I don't even want to say it. Global boom in livestock farming since 2006 is putting extraordinary pressure on nature. It is up 50% since 2006. 20 years. Up 50% livestock farming. And, we need to have a whole show about this, but meat production, big driver of biodiversity loss, big driver of climate change. And then the cropland, the amount of cropland that we need to feed all this livestock is up 25% in 20 years. Wow. That's just, that's just 20 years. 2006 seems like yesterday to me. My goodness. What are we doing? This is our life. It's like we're on a spaceship. We are on a spaceship. I mean, essentially, we're on a spaceship and we've decided to destroy our life support system. Makes no sense. It's irrational. It's stupid. Stupid. And we're not stupid. Humans aren't stupid. We're collective when we, collectively stupid, but individually we're not. So what the heck? What's wrong with us? Carbon capture is a fig leaf for fossil fuel expansion. That's the last one. I'm not going to read the details because we're out of time. However, that is true. Carbon capture. You know how we should be capturing carbon? Forests. That forests capture carbon, and we should stop burning fossil fuels and get on green energy today. Actually, we talked last week about how, whether certain forces like it or not, green energy is here and it's accelerating and it's inevitable. As Bill McKibben, his recent book, Here Comes the Sun. We can't stop it. It's unstoppable. So that's a beautiful thing. It's going to happen, but we need to accelerate. All right. I always like to close the show by saying that I'm Lara Samuels. This is Let's Have Words. We're here Thursday nights. Every other Thursday we are live. We are a call-in show. We love to hear from you. We like to hear what's on your mind on these topics. And I like to close the show by saying, being kind to one another is these days in my country anyway is a radical act. And so I engage in it as much as I can. So be kind, not just to one another, be kind to nature, be kind to the little animals that live in your house and around your house and wherever you go, because they're in decline and we need to respect them. They have a right to be here. All right. So thank you very much, people, and I'll see you soon.